I'm not sure if this was a haunting or a possible case of frogging, but we'll never know. When I was in my early 20s, I ended up dog sitting for a week at my uncle's place completely by myself. It was January, and it was freezing outside. The house was built by my grandfather for his sister, who passed away when I was about 6 years old. She died young from cancer. My only memories of her are from those last days when she was in hospice care, right in the living room. Everyone in the family loved her, and I wish I could have known her better. A few years after she passed, my uncle and his partner bought the house and completely renovated it. It's actually pretty nice, especially considering it was built in the early 70s. After my uncle handed me the keys and showed me how to use the security system, I settled in. I was excited to have the place to myself, especially since I usually had roommates and never got any alone time. But what started as a relaxing week quickly turned into something much more unsettling. On the second day of my stay, we got hit with an Arctic vortex, and everything was covered in thick ice and snow. So I was basically trapped inside. That second night, I couldn't fall asleep. I just laid there for hours, counting sheep. I started hearing voices that seemed to be coming from outside. I remember thinking, wow, you can really hear the neighbors in the subdivision. Then, about 20 minutes later, the home security system went off. That freaked me out, so I got up to check the alarm. The screen said, basement door ajar. I didn't know what else to do, so I grabbed a knife, not my brightest idea, got the dog, and headed downstairs. Now, the basement is unfinished, and there's a sliding glass door down there. My uncle always puts a bar in the track to keep it from opening, even if it's unlocked. When I go down there, the door was open, and the bar had been removed. The ground outside was covered in snow, but there were no footprints. I thought about calling the cops, but then I remembered the stash of weed I had found in the basement and decided against it. To make things worse, I had taken a sleeping pill about 10 minutes before all of this had happened, so my body was getting heavier and heavier as I searched the house. Eventually, I just collapsed from the exhaustion. When I told my friends and family about it later, most of them were skeptical. They said I probably left the door unlocked and maybe the dog opened it somehow. But that honestly made no sense. The dog was sleeping in my room, and no way a dog could remove a bar from the sliding door. What really got me later was realizing that the door couldn't be opened from the outside. That meant someone or something was trying to get out, and that made it even more creepy. And unfortunately, that's just the beginning of the weird stuff. The next night, I was lounging on the couch watching movies. That was when I heard a soft thumping against the side of the house. It sounded like someone was throwing a tennis ball at the wall. At first, I brushed it off as just the pipe settling in on an old house. But then it happened on the opposite side of the house. The thumping continued. The sound started moving around to different sides of the house, always in the same order and rhythm. It repeated this pattern 3 times before moving to another part of the house. This went on for about 2 hours, and I was getting really frustrated and annoyed by the constant knocking. Then, just as it suddenly started, it stopped. Over the next few days, I started noticing things being out of place. I'd set something down, and later it would be somewhere else. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. I decided to get more organized. I started closing doors behind me to make sure that I wouldn't misplace things. I even laid out my work uniform and shoes on the kitchen table to make getting ready in the morning easier. When the ice and snow finally cleared up, I was able to go back to work. That morning, I got up early, took a shower, and everything seemed fine. None of my stuff was out of place, and I was about to head out the door. I saw my shirt and shoes at the table and thought, great, everything here is going smooth. But when I bent down to tie my shoes, and reached for my shirt, it was gone. I had just seen it folded and ready to go the night before, and now it was missing. I started feeling crazy as I searched the house, getting more and more stressed out about being late for work. Eventually, I did find my shirt. It was in the spare bedroom, crumpled up in a ball and thrown into the corner of the room. I was so confused and frustrated as I made my way to work. Later that day, when I went back, I let the dog out through the basement sliding doors. As I sat inside avoiding the cold, I heard soft footsteps upstairs, moving from one side of the house to the other. I grabbed the dog and checked the whole place again, but of course, I found nothing. At this point, I started doubting my own sanity. I wondered if I was slipping into some kind of psychosis. The footsteps happened again the next day. On the last day of my stay, one of my friends came over to help me tidy up the house before my uncle returned. We were sitting downstairs while my dog was outside, both of us looking at our phones, when I heard the footsteps again. My friend didn't believe me at first when I told her about all the weird things happening, but this time, I decided to stay quiet and see if she heard it too. Suddenly, she looked up at me with wide, scared eyes. She asked in a whisper if I heard it. "There's someone up there," she said, pointing in the direction of the footsteps as they moved from one side of the house to the other. Then she jumps up and says she's leaving. I have never felt so vindicated in my life. After doubting me the entire time, she was suddenly terrified. When my uncle and his partner got back, I asked them if they have ever experienced anything strange in the house. My uncle's partner said that once he saw a woman in a white dress walking down their hallway. He always sometimes hears music playing from nowhere. What was strange was that my uncle's dog never acted weird during my stay. If he had, it would have freaked me out even more. I still struggle to make sense of what happened. Sometimes I wonder if someone was secretly hiding in the house, living in some unchecked corner. But then again, I don't think a person could have done some of the things I experienced. It is troubling to say the least. Have any of you ever felt conflicted after experiencing similar phenomena? Felt like an experience could be due to a person hiding rather than a haunting? Honestly, I almost want to believe it's just a person. But if it really was someone behind all of that, I'd be way more freaked out than if it was just a haunting. I used to live in a small village of about 140 people at the time, which now it's probably less. It was in northeast France. We lived on the east part of the small village, which is basically a street. About 100 meters from our house was my stepfather's parents' house, and right next to them was his grandparents' house. But they both died before my mom and I moved into the village. It was the beginning of the summer in 2013. The house of my great-grandparents of my stepfather were now occupied by a Croatian man who we'll call Mr. G. He was a very nice man who became very good friends with my family and still is to this day. He arrived in the house about a year ago at that point, and since it's summer, he left to go visit his family in Croatia. He asked us to watch the house while he was gone, which I did while I was 17 at the time. I would arrive around 8 a.m. in the morning and leave around 11 p.m. It was a nice house with 2 floors, and while I would spend about 90% of the time on the first floor, I would sometimes have to go upstairs to use the bathroom. There was a bathroom on the first floor, but it was full of spiders, and I'm afraid of those. One day, I was about to go back home, but before that, I had to go upstairs to go use the bathroom. The second floor always felt a bit off, especially at night, like you weren't supposed to be there, or you were perturbing someone or something. As I went upstairs, I noticed the door to the bathroom on the right is open, which gave me a creepy vibe as it was pitch black. I decided not to pay much mind about it. I entered the other bathroom to do my business then. As I opened the door to leave, I see on the toilet across the hall was the face of a woman. Or more precisely, the head on a toilet, as if it was put on. It was looking at me and somewhat smiling. It also was not a maniacal smile. It was just a regular smile. That still scared the living hell out of me. I just ran out of there, leaving the lights on and my computer there. Here's a bit of backstory to go with it. Remember how I said that Mr. G arrived in this house about a year ago? Well, before he arrived, the house was bought by a family of 2 who ended up having a 3rd child while living there. They arrived in late 2009, early 2010, and they left abruptly in 2012. Well, the reason why they left is pretty sad. The father worked a night shift, and the one night, the mother had a terrible headache. Apparently, they didn't give any medicine for it, or at least it wasn't strong enough. She left her house looking for help, so she went to the neighbors, who were my stepfather's parents. Unfortunately, she would die on their doorstep. She died of a ruptured aneurysm. After that, the family left shortly after, which is understandable. Also, as I said before, my stepfather's grandparents died long ago. After my stepfather's grandfather had died, his wife committed suicide shortly after. She did so by jumping into the well that was located at the crossroads, about 20 meters or so down the street. To this day, I'm not sure if it was a ghost or my imagination. And if it was a ghost, it was most likely the mother, and not the grandmother of my stepfather, as the face looked young and in her 30s. When I was 12 years old, I was in my bed, and it was around 10:30 at night. I remember I wasn't very tired, but I was wide awake. On the left side of my bed was the door to my room, which was open, and I was just looking outside my bedroom door, doing nothing. I was staring and hoping that at some point I'd fall asleep, but again, I wasn't tired at all. My parents were in their room not far from me, and I could faintly hear the TV, and at the time, my mom had a crystal lamp that she turned on every night. So outside my room, and my room itself, wasn't completely pitch black. It was bright enough to look around my room, but dark enough that I could sleep. As I was laying on my side and looking out of my door, I thought I'd just turn over to the other side, and maybe the dim light was keeping me up. But as I turned to the other side, what I saw was as clear as day. It appeared to be a child with white pasty skin, the color of a cold dead body. It had short, straight black hair, and the mouth was open wide. The worst and most terrifying part that I will never forget was the eyes, or at least there were no eyes at all. Just pitch black holes, but I could feel whatever it was, even though I thought it didn't have eyes, staring straight at me. It was as real as when my mom was in the room saying goodnight to me earlier. I froze for 5 seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. I felt its presence when we locked eyes. It didn't make any noise or even move at all. Very soon, the confusion and shock turned into pure terror. I've never jumped out of bed faster that night. I ran directly to my parents' room, crying and shaking intensely out of fear. I'm now 26 years old, and I've never forgotten what I saw that night, as well as the feeling of its presence. Remembering it never fails to give me goosebumps and a sense of fear. I've never been able to explain it. I never watched horror movies or had anything to do with ghosts and the paranormal. So whatever I saw that night was 100% new to me.